Hi, everyone. I'm Brandon Harrison. I'm Associate Features Programmer here at Doc NYC. I'm very pleased to welcome directors Diana Niel and Richard Poplack from Influence. How are you guys doing?
Good, Brandon. How are you
Good.
doing?
How's it going?
I'm glad to talk to you. I have a
Yes.
lot of questions. I'm very
Mhm.
curious, mostly about the breadth of this film. Like, this is you're spanning decades, G- across the globe, and so many intricate levels of this story. How were you able to get all of these figures involved and participating? What was that process like?
It was a long process. I guess we spent about 18 months before shooting, maybe a little bit longer, getting everything together. Obviously, the key piece of that puzzle was Lord Bell himself, which Richard will talk about in a second. But we really, as investigative journalists, we really wanted it to feel comprehensive. We were aware that we were kind of going to have to pack a lot of information in the film, and went through a couple of different versions as a result. But I think it was just a process of explaining to people. For us, it was very important to be able to tell the story from the inside, as opposed, excuse me, as opposed to having commentators or the usual suspects who journalists or whatever who would be commentating on their own reporting, for example. And so we spent a lot of time reaching out to people, explaining why we felt it was important that they speak from their own experiences. And I think it was hard. It was a lot of hard work, a lot of emails, but I think hopefully it paid off in the end.
Yeah, and I think for us, what was important was that this was Star Wars from the perspective of Darth Vader. We didn't want this to be the usual kind of good guys approach to documentary filmmaking, although I think there is some real uplift and some real lessons on how to beat the kind of tools that Bell Pottinger was so good at wielding. But obviously, the key piece of access that we got was Lord Bell himself, the world's most famous and dangerous PR man. And I was dispatched by Diana and our producers to go to London to track him down. It took me about 3 or 4 days to get the number that I needed to give him an SMS. He invited me over to his Belgravia townhome for tea. We sat down and had a very interesting discussion. I told him we were making the film with or without his participation. I told him how many days we needed. I said we needed, we wanted to shoot with him for 3 days. We ended up shooting with him for 5 days. So it was this really weird piece of access. And Diana and I, people are always like, well, why did he do it? How does this work? How do you? And the thing about journalism and documentary filmmaking is the magic is the access. And I'm not sure you ever want to interrogate magic too much. It's like, when you start digging into, religious beliefs, they kind of start to fray a little. And I think it's the same with being a journalist. You don't want to ask why.
In case you lose the magic.
Very well said. I mean, for me, I'm curious about the actual crafting of the film too, because you get this access, you get to talk to Lord Bell, and now you have to create this narrative around him as a figure. How did you guys figure out how you're going to craft his story? Because I guess he is, the lead of the empire there. Take your Star Wars reference.
Yeah, exactly. I think we realized early on that we would need to really dig deep into his life story, and he had written an autobiography, I guess, maybe 4 years ago. So that was very helpful. But we wanted to understand essentially how Bell represented the industry as a whole, and also Bell Pottinger. There were a lot of things that we wanted to achieve. So I think in doing that and understanding how trajectory of his career, we were able to split it up into 3 kind of broad categories, which was advertising, then political advising, political influence, and then reputation management, which tracked with the historical development of the industry as well. And in that way, he kind of very conveniently became a great representative of the development of weaponized communication, if you want to put it that way. And so I think in doing that, we were able to then kind of look at the major case studies or jobs that he had done throughout those 3 phases that kind of encompassed and inculcated both his philosophies, but also the type of work that he was helping to pioneer and helping to develop. So that was we needed a kind of a rigid structure in a way to help us figure out how to tell the story. Initially, we had a chapterization type of thing in mind, but it just all got a little bit too complicated. So we tried to just simplify it in that way.
And I think one of our major intentions with the structure was to show an audience how the post-truth era, the alternative facts era, was developed, and how it had a lineage that doesn't. I mean, it goes all the way back to Aristotle. I mean, the birthplace of politics was also the birthplace of weaponized bullshit. And I mean, that makes total sense, right? You have to sell a message. But I think we wanted to draw a very, very sharp link between the golden age of advertising, particularly in London, which ended up becoming the center of the whitewashing industry in the globe. The British are far better and far more experienced at weaponized communications in the West, certainly than the Americans. While they may not be as experienced and as advanced as the Russians and North Koreans, they're very, very good at that type of work. And so we wanted to show an audience how the world that we find ourselves in now has a context, has a historical context. And for us, that was very, very important. And that also informed the structure of the film.
Talking about that historical context, I was impressed by, you know, the archival breadth of the film. What was it like, you know, going through all that footage, acquiring that footage? Were there any surprises? Can you talk about that process?
Sure. I think we were so fortunate as filmmakers to have, you know, a relatively comfortable budget, which allowed us to employ an archivist. Our editor is extremely experienced with cutting this type of documentary and working with archive. So they were able to fairly easily. I was actually really surprised by how quickly they were able to kind of develop a library of stock footage and archival footage, and really just some gems. Ryan Mullins, who's the editor based in Montreal, he is fantastic, and he found a whole archive of Saatchi and Saatchi advertisements that we were then able to kind of use tongue-in-cheek throughout the film, as you saw, to kind of make a little bit of commentary here and there. But all of those were original Saatchi and Saatchi ads from those kind of the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And they just, a lot of them are just so wacky and kind of bizarre. And it just really helped with the tone of the film to be able to incorporate those. But also just, I think the general news archive, you know, we did tend to stick to the Bell Pottinger work that was done, that was fairly, you know, work on bigger, more well-known, more long-term type of campaigns, like the Pinochet campaign, like Iraq, where there was a wealth of footage available. So that certainly helped. And I think without that,
and informed our choices.
Absolutely. And you know, we wanted to be able to make a very visual film. And in that way, I think the two came together really nicely. We were very pleased with that. Yeah.
I mean, there's a breadth and huge geopolitical scope to what Lord Bell was doing, Saatchi and Saatchi was doing, Bell Pottinger was doing. But what do you feel like this film means, and the uncovering of everything that was going on with weaponized communication for South Africa? What would you like people there to like take away from your film?
Well, the film has been very controversial here for one reason in particular, or for a number of reasons, but one in particular, I'd say. And that is the fact that what Lord Bell says, what Nigel Oakes, who was one of the founding co-founders of the holding company that would end up being Cambridge Analytica, and what a number of other really, really important and powerful political operatives say on screen, apart from the fact that this knowledge is, I think we sourced it 8 times, is that the South African election was effectively rigged in 1994. You know, so you have this miracle election. You have Al Gore. We have archive of Al Gore and Hillary Clinton in the country saying this is a miracle election. It's going to be amazing. Yet, to a degree, the South African election was too perfect and unfolded in a manner that was too perfect, with an outcome that was too perfect. And it's often referred to as the miracle election, but to our thinking, the miracle was the fact that the National Party, the outgoing apartheid regime, won over 20% of the vote and enabled them to effectively execute a veto when it came to the constitutional making process. So in other words, the guys who were kicked out after apartheid, and I use kicked out in scare quotes, ended up basically writing the Constitution, or having a huge hand in writing the Constitution. So when you look at it that way, you start to understand how dispiriting and upsetting it is for a South African audience to grasp the enormity of that particular information. And I think it has a wider echo and a wider knock-on effect, because it explains to us that very early on in the 90s, the dozens of emerging democracies all over the world following the fall of the Berlin Wall and I call it almost the second liberation of Africa. So many of those early elections were compromised. And there was this understanding right there that democracy could be commodified and sold to the highest bidder.
Yeah, I think that was the most surprising. Obviously, the more recent revelations, I think a lot of people here, I mean, Bell Pottinger is so well known in South Africa. We're a very mediated country. And that was such an all-encompassing moment in history for us, you know, when Bell Pottinger was being brought down, because it also encompassed the bringing down of our then president, Jacob Zuma, who stepped down, I want to say 8 months after Bell Pottinger went into liquidation. Right. And so, you know, it was a very big political event for the country, but I certainly think it was, you know, we received a lot of feedback that, you know, for people to see themselves reflected in frankly the activism that went on there, both at a public level but also in opposition politics, you know, the investigative journalism that went into that, I think was very encouraging for people to see that there was actually a measurable result from all of that civic action.
Obviously, when you're doing a profile of such a controversial figure, you're not giving them any sort of veto power over your film. But was Lord Bell able to see the film before he passed, or no, he was not, or any piece of it interesting? I was definitely curious about that.
No, he did not get to see it.
We were still shooting when he died. Yeah.
Actually, we were shooting in his neighborhood the morning that he passed away.
We had no idea that he was on his deathbed, but we found out the day we were shooting outside his house was the day he passed away. So we were in the post-production process, but we were nowhere near of kind of a finished draft.
And I mean, I think you'll be unsurprised to hear that I think he and his family were expecting a hagiography and a you know, sort of Beautiful Mind style biopic. They didn't get that.
It's pretty hilarious. Ultimately, and this is my last question, this film was very powerful, especially for the current time. What would you want people to take away from your film around the world?
I think there's a couple of things, and the first is that we need to understand that we have to practice information hygiene. All we wanted our film to show you was these are the type of people who package the information that you consume. Would you go to the grocery store and buy something off the shelf that Lord Bell was cooking up? I don't think you would. So I think there's a similar thing. If one of your friends said to you, "I'm a heroin junkie," you wouldn't say, "That's incredible, man, good for you." But we're happy to say that we're information junkies. I'm a news junkie.
Love the news.
Well, that's not a good thing. Stop. Right? It's as bad as opioids as far as we're concerned. So I think we need to practice information hygiene. We need to be far more studious about the information that we consume. And the second, that the latter South African story proves, is that through civic action, through organizing, through smart organizing, and through understanding the tools of mediation that are used by strategic communicators today, you can beat them at their own game. So I think those two facts are very, very important to take into consideration, and I think that's kind of the lesson that the film shows.
Thank you, Diana and Richard, so much for your film influence. An amazing film. I hope everyone enjoyed it here. Thank you for bringing it to Doc NYC.
Thanks, Brandon. Love you.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks.